They joked about her as soon as she walked away. Too quiet, too old-fashioned, too slow for a modern ER. One resident called her dead weight. Another laughed when she triple-checked a medication order. The new nurse didn't respond. She never did. She just worked quietly, precisely, and without asking for attention. Then a critical patient arrived. Unidentified, severe trauma, no family, no paperwork. Doctors rushed. Voices overlapped. Orders piled up. The new nurse spoke once. She was ignored. Minutes later, the patient crashed, and that's when the ER doors opened again. A Marine colonel walked in, mud still on his boots, rank unmistakable, eyes locked on the chaos. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He walked straight past the doctors, stopped in front of the nurse everyone had mocked, and raised his hand in a silent, perfect salute. The room froze. Because whatever they thought she was, they were about to find out how wrong they'd been. Like the video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. At 2:03 a.m., the emergency department at Cedar Grove Regional Hospital ran on habit more than urgency. Night shifts always did. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over polished floors and stainless steel counters. Monitors beeped in soft, predictable rhythms. A coffee machine sputtered near the nurse's station, filling the air with the burnt smell of something that had been reheated too many times. This was the hour when arrogance hid behind exhaustion. The new nurse clocked in without ceremony. Her name was Laura Bennett. She wore standard Navy scrubs, no personalization, no bright sneakers, no clipped-on pins. Her hair was pulled back tight into a simple bun. She moved with an economy that suggested she hated wasted motion, checking the assignment board before anyone noticed she'd arrived. Overflow beds, trauma support, psych holding. The worst combination on the floor. She took it without comment. Across the station, a group of residents glanced up briefly. "That's the new one," one muttered. "Looks like she wandered in from a community clinic," another replied. A quiet snicker followed. Laura didn't look at them. She logged in, checked her charts, and started her rounds. Doctor Ethan Markham, the senior resident on duty, watched her from behind his tablet. 31 years old, confident, fast-talking, and well aware that this ER ran on his pace at night. "She's slow," he said under his breath after watching her double-check a medication order. A nurse beside him shrugged. "She's thorough," Markham scoffed. "Thorough gets you killed in trauma." Laura overheard that. She didn't react. She de-learned long ago that responding to mockery only encouraged it. Instead, she adjusted an IV drip, spoke gently to a confused elderly patient, and moved on. The ER drifted through the early part of the shift. A drunk driver with a fractured collarbone, a teenager with a panic attack, a construction worker nursing a deep laceration. Laura handled each one quietly, efficiently, documenting carefully, asking questions others didn't bother with. "Why are you triple-checking that?" a resident asked at one point. "Because assumptions kill people," Laura replied calmly. The resident rolled his eyes and walked away. At 2:41 a.m., the tone changed, not suddenly, subtly. The automatic doors slid open and paramedics rushed in with a stretcher moving faster than usual. "Male, late 40s, one shouted. "Found unconscious near the docks, severe trauma suspected, no ID, vitals unstable." The ER snapped to attention. "Trauma bay," Markham ordered. "Move." The stretcher slammed into place as staff swarmed the patient. Laura stopped at the edge of the room. She watched. The man's face was pale, lips tinged blue. His chest rose shallowly, unevenly. His jaw was clenched tight, not slack like someone fully unconscious. Laura frowned. That wasn't shock alone. She stepped closer. "Doctor," she said calmly, "his breathing pattern is—" "Not now," Markham snapped without looking at her. "We're busy." She paused, then tried again. "His chest movement is asymmetric, and his neck—" Markham turned sharply. "Are you telling me how to run my bay?" "I'm telling you something. S off," Laura replied evenly. A resident laughed. "Relax, we've got it." Laura stayed where she was. She watched the patient's left hand twitch once, just once. Not a spasm, controlled. Her pulse didn't spike, but something colder settled in her gut. Prep for intubation, Markham ordered. We're not waiting. Laura took a half step forward. Doctor, if you intubate before addressing the pressure, you're going to... That's enough, Markham snapped. He turned to security who hovered near the entrance out of habit more than necessity. Get her out of the bay. The words landed hard, security hesitated. She's assigned here, one officer said. Not anymore, Markham replied. She's interfering. Interfering, Laura met his eyes. This patient is compensating, she said quietly. He's holding on, but not for long. You're treating symptoms, not the cause. Markham scoffed. Escort her out. The officers stepped in, each taking an arm, not roughly, but firmly. Laura didn't resist. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. As they guided her out of the trauma bay, staff glanced up, some amused, some uncomfortable, some relieved. At the nurse's station, her badge was unclipped and handed back to her. Policy, one of the officers said. Laura accepted it, then handed it right back. Inside the trauma bay, alarms continued to rise. The walk to the exit was quiet, too quiet. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, letting in the cool night air. Laura stepped outside. The doors closed behind her. Inside, the ER returned to motion, voices overlapping, orders flying, confidence restored. They believed the distraction had been removed. Laura stopped beneath the dim glow of a parking lot light. She didn't pace. She didn't curse. She looked back through the glass at the chaos she could no longer enter. The alarm sounded sharper now. Wrong. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, no notifications, one bar of signal. She typed a short message, no emotion, no explanation, just facts. She hit send. Inside Cedar Grove Regional Hospital, the patient's vitals dipped again. Why isn't he responding? Markham demanded. No one answered. Because the nurse they'd laughed at was the only one who'd seen the problem coming. Outside, Laura Bennett slipped her phone back into her pocket and straightened her shoulders. Far off in the distance, beyond the dark outline of the city, a low sound rolled through the night. Not thunder, rotors. Laura waited, because the laughter inside the ER was about to stop. Inside Cedar Grove Regional Hospital, confidence filled the space Laura Bennett had just left. It always did after someone was removed. Dr. Ethan Markham adjusted his gloves and turned back to the trauma bay, irritation still simmering beneath his calm exterior. All right, he said sharply. Let's focus. We don't need commentary, just execution. The team moved quickly, too quickly. The unidentified man lay motionless on the gurney, chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls. The ventilator mask hissed rhythmically, but the numbers on the monitor refused to settle. Heart rate elevated. Oxygen borderline, blood pressure narrowing dangerously. Why isn't he stabilizing? Markham muttered. A resident leaned closer to the monitor. We're following protocol. Markham exhaled through his nose. Then protocol isn't enough. The patient's jaw tightened suddenly, muscles clenching hard enough that his teeth ground together audibly. Did you see that? A nurse whispered. Markham waved it off. Agonal response. Stay on task. But unease crept in anyway. The room felt crowded not with people but with something unspoken. Prep the tube, Markham ordered. We're securing the airway. A resident hesitated. Doctor, shouldn't we? Do it, Markham snapped. The tube slid in smoothly. For half a second it looked like the right call. Then the alarm screamed. Oxygen dropping, BP's crashing. The patient's chest stopped moving altogether. Bag him, Markham shouted. They tried, nothing. The monitor shrieked louder, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. What the hell? Markham barked. Why isn't he responding? No one answered because no one knew. Outside, beneath the parking lot lights, Laura Bennett stood perfectly still. She could no longer hear the alarms, but she could feel the mistake unfolding. She checked her phone, one message, then another. She didn't read them yet. She didn't need to. Back in the trauma bay, panic replaced certainty. His neck, look at his neck veins. They're distended. Markham froze, neck pressure. The words Laura had spoken earlier replayed in his mind, unwanted and precise. Look at the tension. Cold realization crept up his spine. This is pressure-related, he said slowly. A resident looked at him. You mean? Tension pneumothorax, Markham finished. The room went still. Someone whispered. She tried to tell us. No one argued. Markham turned sharply toward the doorway. Where's security? He demanded. They escorted her out, the charge nurse replied quietly. Markham's stomach dropped. Get her back, he said. Now, security rushed toward the exit. They came back moments later, faces pale. She's gone, one officer said, off hospital property. Markham swore under his breath. The patient convulsed weakly. Oxygen S at 50? We're losing him. Markham grabbed the decompression kit. His hands shook. He stopped. He knew enough to know this was beyond improvisation. The hospital lights flickered just once. A low vibration rolled through the floor. What was that? Someone asked. Another vibration followed, stronger. Windows rattled. The sound deepened. Rotors. Heads turned toward the glass walls lining the ER. Outside, the night sky flashed briefly as a massive shadow passed overhead. In the administrative office, the night supervisor answered his ringing phone. Yes, this is Cedar Grove. He went silent. Yes, sir, understood. He hung up slowly. What is it? Someone asked. His voice barely worked. Military aircraft just requested clearance to land. Back in the ER, Markham stared at the patient, slipping away second by second. We need decompression, he said urgently. Now, but the nurse, someone began. Markham clenched his fists. Then I'll do it. He positioned the needle, paused, hesitated. The doubt was worse than fear. The ER doors opened, not with urgency, with authority. Boots hit the floor in controlled rhythm. Men in dark uniforms moved in without announcement, scanning the room, taking in everything in seconds. One of them stopped in the center of the ER. Where is Nurse Laura Bennett? He asked calmly. No one answered immediately, because in that moment everyone understood something too late. Removing her hadn't removed a complication. It had removed the only person who knew what was wrong. And now the people who never arrived by ambulance had come because of it. The men who entered Cedar Grove Regional Hospital's ER did not announce themselves. They didn't shout commands. They didn't rush. They simply walked in and the room changed. Conversations died mid-sentence. A resident froze with a syringe half-drawn. A nurse stopped typing. Even the alarms seemed to recede into the background as everyone instinctively registered the same thing. These people were not here to observe. They were here because something had gone wrong. The lead officer, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp with experience, stopped near the center of the ER. He surveyed the room in silence, taking in the trauma bay, the unstable patient, the strained faces. Then he spoke. Where is Nurse Laura Bennett? The question landed harder than any shouted order. Dr. Ethan Markham swallowed and stepped forward. I'm the senior resident. What is this about? The officer's eyes shifted to him, cool, assessing. This is about a patient whose condition was mismanaged, he said evenly, and a nurse who was removed for trying to prevent it. Markham felt heat crawl up his neck. She interfered with protocol. The officer didn't react. Protocol doesn't supersede physiology, he replied, and it certainly doesn't justify silencing the only person in the room who recognized the problem. A murmur rippled through the staff. The officer turned slightly and spoke into his radio. Lock down this wing, no entries, no exits. Security complied instantly. Markham's authority evaporated in real time. In Trauma Bay 1, the patient convulsed weakly. BP's barely readable. Oxygen's dropping again. Markham spun back toward the bed, panic sharpening his movements. We need decompression now. He reached for the kit. His hands shook. He paused, because now everyone was watching. Outside, beneath the cold glow of parking lot lights, Laura Bennett stood with her phone in her hand. The sound she'd heard earlier grew louder, closer, rotors slicing through the night air with unmistakable force. Two military helicopters descended toward the helipad, their lights washing over the hospital walls in harsh white sweeps. The ground trembled as they landed. Laura didn't flinch. She de-stood under louder skies. The side door of the nearest helicopter slid open. Two Marines jumped down, scanning the area with practiced precision. One of them spotted her and froze. Ma'am, he said, voice dropping instinctively. "We're here for you." Laura nodded once. "I know." "We're escorting you inside," the other Marine said. "Senior Command is already on site." Laura didn't ask questions. She followed. Back in the ER, the lead officer watched as Markham hovered over the patient, uncertainty written all over his face. "You identified tension pneumothorax too late," the officer said calmly, "and intubated first. Markham didn't deny it. You increased pressure on already compromised lungs," the officer continued. "That's why he's crashing." A resident whispered. "She warned us." The officer's jaw tightened. The ER doors opened again. This time, footsteps sounded different, measured, controlled, certain. Laura Bennett walked in, flanked by Marines, but not guided by them. She didn't look at the officers first. She didn't look at Markham. She went straight to the trauma bay. "What's his status?" she asked. Markham answered automatically. "Unstable. Suspected tension pneumothorax. You intubated," Laura finished. "Yes," her jaw tightened, not in anger but calculation. "Prep for immediate decompression," she said. "Now." A nurse moved instantly. No one questioned her, not anymore. The lead officer watched closely. "That's her," someone whispered. The officer nodded. He recognized command presence when he saw it. Laura assessed the patient in seconds, neck veins distended, chest movement minimal on one side, resistance beneath her palm. Same signs, less time. She positioned herself at the patient's side. "On my count," she said calmly. The assisting nurse swallowed. "Ready? 1." The room leaned in without realizing it. 2. Markham's heart pounded in his ears. Laura acted. The needle went in. The hiss of escaping air tore through the trauma bay, violent, unmistakable. The patient gasped, chest rising sharply for the first time in minutes. The monitor responded instantly. Heart rate slowed. Oxygen climbed. Blood pressure stabilized just enough to pull him back from the edge. The alarms softened. No one spoke. Someone exhaled loudly, realizing they'd been holding their breath. "She did it," a resident whispered. Laura stayed focused, stabilizing the catheter, issuing short, precise instructions. "Chest tube next," she said. "Prep now." The team moved as one, no hesitation, no debate. Markham watched her hands, steady and deliberate. "You knew," he said quietly. Laura didn't look up. "Yes, you tried to tell us." "Yes, and she glanced at him briefly. "You didn't listen." The words weren't cruel, they were factual. The lead officer stepped closer. "That intervention saved his life," he said. Laura nodded once, still working. The officer turned to Markham. "You removed her from care. Do you understand what that cost?" Markham swallowed. "Yes." "Good," the officer replied, "because you're going to account for it." Minutes later, the patient was stable enough for transfer. The ER buzzed again, but differently now. Quieter, sharper, every movement intentional. The officer approached Laura once more. "Senior Command wants a briefing," he said. "They're en route." Laura nodded. "I'll finish here." He hesitated. "You could have escalated earlier." Laura finally looked at him. "I wanted them to see the mistake," she said, "not just hear about it." The officer studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. As Laura stepped back from the bedside, the ER remained silent, not out of fear but recognition. No one had announced who she was. No one had needed to, because when she walked back in, the room hadn't gone silent by coincidence. It had gone silent because authority had arrived. The ER did not return to normal after the patient stabilized. It couldn't. Too much had already shifted. The alarms were quieter now, reduced to steady confirmation instead of urgent warnings. The trauma bay smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat. Nurses moved with renewed focus, but no one spoke unless necessary. The earlier mockery, the jokes, the eye rolls, the whispered comments had vanished completely. Something heavier had taken its place. Laura Bennett stood at the bedside, finishing her final checks. The patient's breathing was controlled now, chest rising evenly, color slowly returning to his face. He was sedated but alive, alive because someone had finally listened. She removed her gloves and disposed of them, movements unhurried. Behind her, Dr. Ethan Markham stood with his hands clasped tightly behind his back. His confidence from earlier in the night was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Before anyone could speak, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Not hurried, not loud, measured. A man entered the ER wearing a Marine service uniform. His rank insignia was unmistakable. A Marine colonel bearing himself with the kind of authority that didn't need reinforcement. His hair was close-cropped and gray at the edges, his face weathered, his expression unreadable. Conversation stopped instantly. The colonel took in the scene without comment, the patient, the staff, the tension still hanging in the air. His eyes moved once deliberately until they landed on Laura. He stopped walking. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the colonel did something no one expected. He brought his hand up in a crisp, silent salute. Perfect form, perfect stillness, he held it. Laura froze. The ER froze with her. Slowly, she straightened, her posture changing instinctively, muscle memory taking over. Without a word, she returned the salute, precise, controlled, respectful. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The colonel lowered his hand. "At ease," he said quietly. A stunned murmur rippled through the room. Markham felt his stomach drop. The colonel turned to the assembled staff. "For those of you unaware," he said evenly, "the nurse you dismissed tonight is Colonel Laura Bennett, United States Marine Corps. She requested low visibility and temporary civilian assignment." No one spoke. No one moved. "She did not request to be underestimated," the colonel continued. "She did not request to be ignored, and she certainly did not request to be escorted out while a patient deteriorated." Markham swallowed hard. "I made the decision," he said quietly, stepping forward. "I take responsibility." The colonel studied him for a long moment. "Do you understand why she was here?" he asked. Markham shook his head. "No, sir. She was embedded to observe," the colonel replied. "To evaluate how civilian emergency departments function under pressure, how they respond when hierarchy conflicts with evidence." Markham felt the weight of every word. "And tonight," the colonel added, "you provided that data." Laura shifted her weight slightly. "Sir," she said calmly, "the patient is stable and ready for transfer." The colonel turned back to her, expression softening just a fraction. "Good work," he said, "as expected." He glanced at the trauma bay. "He's one of ours." That confirmed what many had already suspected. The senior administrator stepped forward nervously. "Colonel," he began, "we had no knowledge of—" The colonel raised a hand gently. "This is not about what you knew," he said. "It's about what you chose to do with the information you were given." The administrator fell silent. "You removed a medical professional for asking you to pause and observe," the colonel continued. "That is not leadership, that is insecurity." No one argued. Markham stepped forward again, voice low. "Colonel Bennett," he said, "I owe you an apology." Laura looked at him steadily. "You owe your patients attention," she replied. "Apologies don't save lives." Markham nodded, shame burning in his chest. "I won't forget this." Laura studied him for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "Good," she said. As preparations for transfer continued, the colonel motioned Laura aside. "You could have identified yourself sooner," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. You chose not to." "Yes. Why?" Laura looked back at the ER, at the residents moving more deliberately now, the nurses double-checking without being mocked, the absence of casual arrogance. "Because respect that's forced disappears," she said. "Respect that's earned stays." The colonel held her gaze. "That's why you lead Marines," he said simply. The gurney rolled out minutes later, escorted by personnel who didn't need direction. The patient was alive, stable, and on his way to definitive care. As the doors closed behind them, the ER stood silent once more. The colonel turned back to the staff. "This facility will undergo review," he said, "not to punish but to correct." His eyes settled briefly on Markham. "And next time someone asks you to slow down and look," he added, "you do it." "Yes, sir," Markham replied. The colonel turned back to Laura. "You're finished here for the night," he said. Laura nodded. She unclipped her hospital badge, not in surrender but habit, and placed it on the counter. Then she clipped it back on, the same badge, the same scrubs, now carrying a very different weight. As she walked toward the exit, no one laughed, no one whispered, no one looked away. They watched her go in complete silence, not because she demanded it, but because they finally understood who had been standing among them all along. Dawn arrived quietly at Cedar Grove Regional Hospital. Not with sirens, not with urgency, with exhaustion. The ER looked almost normal again, beds cleaned, monitors reset, fresh staff filtering in with coffee cups and half-awake expressions. But anyone who had worked the night shift felt the difference immediately. Something had shifted. In Trauma Bay 3, the patient's bed sat empty. He'd been transferred before sunrise under military escort, stabilized and breathing on his own by the time the convoy left the parking lot. The equipment had already been cleaned, restocked, and prepared for the next emergency. But no one forgot what had happened there or who had saved him. Laura Bennett stood at the sink washing her hands slowly. The routine was familiar, grounding, soap, water, dry. The same ritual she'd performed after thousands of cases in places far less forgiving than this ER. Behind her, Dr. Ethan Markham waited. He didn't interrupt. He'd learned better. When she finished and turned, he spoke quietly. "The review will be thorough." Laura nodded. "It should be." "They'll ask why we didn't listen," he added. Laura met his eyes. "They should." Markham exhaled slowly. "I let ego get in the way." "Yes," Laura said simply. There was no cruelty in it, no judgment, just truth. "And I won't again," Markham said. Laura studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "That's all that matters." At the nurse's station, the tone had changed. No jokes, no eye rolls, no whispered commentary. "She didn't raise her voice once," a resident murmured. "And everyone still stopped," another replied. "I thought she was just quiet." "So did I." Respect moved through the department without needing to be announced. Near the administrative offices, the senior administrator stood with a clipboard that suddenly felt heavier than usual. "We'll be updating our escalation procedures," he said to no one in particular, "and security protocols." A Marine officer standing nearby responded calmly, "You'll also be updating how your staff defines interference." The administrator nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely." Laura finished her charting and clipped her badge back into place. Same badge, same scrubs, nothing outwardly different, but the way people looked at her now paused, attentive, that was new. A charge nurse approached hesitantly. "Are you staying?" "For now," Laura replied. The nurse smiled, relief obvious. "Good." As the morning shift settled in, a Marine aide approached Laura one last time. "Colonel Bennett," he said quietly, "Command is satisfied with the outcome. Your assessment confirmed their concerns." Laura nodded. Then the assignment served its purpose. "You'll be reassigned soon," he added. "I expected that." He hesitated. "Until then?" Laura glanced back at the ER, at the residents moving more deliberately, the nurses speaking up without fear of ridicule, the attending physicians listening instead of dismissing. "I'll keep working nights," she said. "That's when habits show." The aide smiled faintly. "That they do." He saluted her, not sharply, not ceremonially, just enough to acknowledge who she was. Laura returned it briefly, then he turned and walked away, shift change completed without incident. Laura handed off her patients with precise detail, no embellishment, no commentary, just facts, timelines, contingencies. When she was done, she gathered her things. At the exit, Markham caught up with her. "I meant what I said," he told her. "About listening." Laura paused. "Listening isn't the hard part," she said. "Believing is," Markham nodded. "I'm working on that." She gave him a small nod in return. Outside, the morning air was crisp, clean. The helicopters were gone, the parking lot was quiet. The city was waking up, unaware of how close the night had come to ending differently. Laura stood for a moment, breathing it in. She thought of the patient, alive because someone had finally slowed down. She thought of the ER, changed, even if only by degrees. And she thought of the laughter from earlier in the night, already distant, already irrelevant. She adjusted her jacket and walked toward her car. Behind her, Cedar Grove Regional Hospital returned to its routine, Charts, rounds, decisions made one after another. But something fundamental had shifted. Not because a Marine colonel had saluted, not because rank had been revealed, but because the people in that ER had learned, the hard way, that competence doesn't always announce itself, and that mocking the quiet ones can cost more than pride. Laura drove away as the sun rose higher, leaving the hospital behind. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because respect, once earned, doesn't disappear when the room goes quiet.